Hi, everyone. We're so excited you joined us today to talk about Smart Rules, which is one of our newest feature launches at Front. It's been a really exciting launch for us. My name is Logan, and I'm a product marketing manager. And with me today is
Baptiste, I'm a product manager.
Great. So our agenda for today is I'll go over, what are rules, just to give us a foundation, and then what are Smart Rules and some benefits of those. And then I'll pass it over to Baptiste, and he'll do a little bit of a demo of some popular workflows and setups. So diving in, what are rules? A lot of you are probably Front customers and are familiar with our rules engine, but rules are formulas that help you build workflows that automate everyday tasks. So it's a when, if, then automation. And it'll put certain actions on autopilot, which really gives your team a lot of time back so that they can focus on the customer. So rules will automatically triage, escalate, and assign incoming messages based on whatever you tell the formula to do. So an example would be when an incoming message comes, if it is from a VIP customer. So if you put in the rule that that's the logic, then you can add a task, like in this case, tag it as urgent and assign it to Piper if we're pretending that Piper is the one that handles VIP customers. So that's a rule. But in Smart Rules, we built off of them. So a Smart Rule kind of takes this to the next level and adds some dynamic qualities and data extraction to our rules engine. So they're kind of like message templates for rules. A lot of you are probably familiar with message templates, where basically, you have a message, and in green here, you'll see the highlighted different variables that will pull in that information for you. And that's kind of what a Smart Rule does. So we're applying the same quality to rules so that they're faster and easier to build rules that pull in data for you. So because of this, they can replace dozens or even hundreds of previously static rules that used to have these really preset values with a single formulaic rule. So for example, prior to Smart Rules, if you wanted to notify the manager of a teammate, you would need to create a static rule for each teammate and manager duo. Whereas with Smart Rules, you could create one single rule and the manager would be the dynamic variable. And that would do the trick for the entire org. So the Smart Rule would pull in whoever the manager is and assign it and escalate that message up to the manager on its own. So there's a few key values of Smart Rules. One is, as we mentioned, less rules. So whereas before you had a laundry list of static rules, you'll have a lot less now. So it's much easier to manage that workflow, easier upkeep, and it's more adaptable. So you don't need to create a new rule now whenever you have a new customer or a new teammate, because the dynamic variables doing that work for you of pulling in that information. And then they're also just a lot more sophisticated. They use that data extraction and they help your team work better and faster by using dynamic variables. So you've seen us mention dynamic variables a lot. I've said that Smart Rules leverage dynamic variables to replace dozens or hundreds of previously static formulas with a single formulaic rule. So let's dive into what these look like in the product a little bit more. So as we know in Front, that conversations carry a lot of data. So the recipient, the sender, your subject, the content in the body. And some of that data is directly attached to the conversation itself. So it's, customized to that conversation, but the rest can be really looked up really, really easily. So, for every message, you can look up who the contact name is, who the account is, the different assignees, the different inbox it was in. So there's a lot that you can look up there. So that's kind of what a dynamic variable does. So say you want to notify the manager of a teammate involved in the conversation, and you want to tell the rule which teammate to choose. So basically here you can choose, if you want to do this situation, the dynamic variable is going to look up that manager for you based on the data that's attached to the conversation. So here you can see it. So this is based on the recipient. So you can see on the right side there, there's the dynamic variables looking at the recipient and then looking at their manager and assigning it to that person and escalating it up. So that's what the dynamic variable is. It's a part of the SMART rule, and it makes the SMART rule sort of happen. Perfect. So now I'm going to pass this over to Baptiste, who's going to go over some common use cases for SMART rules.
Thank you, Logan. I'm going to go over a few use cases to showcase you how SMART rules work. Let's start with the first example to get us started. Let's imagine that I want to speed up assignments in my team, and I want that every time someone types "I got this," it's assigned to them. It's a trick to get productivity. That way, when you are typing that you're going to get that message, you don't have that extra assign action. With the old system, you would need one rule per teammate. When Logan types this, then assign to Logan. When Baptiste types this, assign to Baptiste. When Charlie types this, assign to Charlie, etc., which is not manageable at scale. So what we're doing with SMART rules, is going to do that with one single rule. How do we do that? If you look at the rule, we start the exact same way as before. You have your when trigger, which is when a comment is added from any teammate that contains "I got this," evaluate the rule. The next step is the new one. We have the dynamic variable, which is going to look at the comment and who the author of that comment is, and use that information in the rule. So you've created your dynamic variable, and then you can reuse it directly in the rule itself, assigning to author of the comment. Usually you would put a teammate here, but here you can put the dynamic variable, and that will be read when the rule is evaluated to look at who was the author of that comment when I'm trying to apply that rule. So that's how we replace a rule that is dozens and dozens of rules for each team, like one for each teammate, to one single rule working for all teammates. So now let's look at the example that Logan talked about before with the manager. So here what's happening is that when an SLA tag is added, there's an SLA breach. The rule is going to notify the manager of the assignee. So what we need to know is, depending on the assignee, who is their manager, and notify that manager. Again, if we wanted to do it with the old rule system, we would need one rule per manager duo, which is not sustainable. So how do we do it with SMART rules? Same as before, when an SLA breach tag is added, evaluate the rule. What is the dynamic variable doing to look up the manager? We're looking at the conversation. We're looking at the assignee of that conversation, and then we're getting the custom field manager of that assignee. What does it mean? We've added a new object called the custom field, just like for contacts, to teammates. And in that custom field, you can declare who the manager of the teammate is for each teammate. So I can say that for Baptiste, it's Nate, for Charlie, it's Jane, etc., etc. And that way, we can reuse that in the rule directly to notify the manager of the assignee. Again, here, in the regular rules, it would be a dropdown with teammates, but you can add now a dynamic variable that will be dynamically, obviously, filled as the rule executes. This is a great example of how you can leverage custom fields to store data in front and then reuse it dynamically in rules with very, very few rules, and making it very easy to understand and very easy to manage. Now we're going to go into the data extraction with our final example, which is extracting an order ID and adding it in a comment all automatically. So let's imagine you are working in a company where order IDs are important. That's how you communicate with your customers. They order stuff from you, and there's an order ID helping you track it. The order ID has a specific format: 2 letters, dash 5 digits, dash 2 digits. And you have an order management system where there's a URL pointing toward that order ID and telling you everything that happens with that order, who the transporter is, what's the status, etc., etc. What the rule is doing here is that it's looking at the content of your email, automatically finding anything that is an order ID, and adding in a comment below the message a link toward your order management system. So how are we doing that great thing? Let's start with the dynamic variable right away. So what we're going to look at is at the message body, because this is where we want to look for order IDs. So this is where we're looking at. Next, the first real step is looking at what is looking like an order ID. So we already talked about the pattern, and what we're doing here is we're going to extract every single occurrence of that pattern: 2 letters, dash 5 digits, dash 2 digits. And that's how we get all the order IDs, and only the order IDs that are interesting to you. So with that already, we've found all the order IDs in any message. But that's not where we're stopping. What we're going to do next is we're going to enrich those order IDs so that they are actually URLs in your order management system. So we are converting each element of that list into a URL that starts with the domain and the path of your order management system, and then the order ID where it needs to point toward. So now we've created a list of order ID URLs that are all links you can click to get into your order management system to get to the order ID of that specific message right away, even though it was just mentioned as an ID. How are we going to use it in the rule? First, we're going to add a condition that is the rule should apply only if there's at least one order ID URL. If there's none, we don't want a comment, an empty comment to pollute your rule, your conversation, sorry. We just want the rule not to run. So we are adding a condition that this list, the order ID URLs, should not be empty. And finally, we're adding a comment that tells you, hey, yeah, all the great orders that were mentioned in that message in a very, very easy to read format below with order ID URLs. That's it for me. I'm going to pass the mic back to Logan to wrap it up.
Amazing. Thank you, Baptiste. So here's a great before and after image that sort of encapsulates the value of smart rules. So whereas before smart rules, you had a laundry list of, dozens, maybe hundreds of company rules for your team. They were all static. And, there is still a use case for some rules. If you want to create a quick rule that doesn't involve this extra step of looking things up, then you can still create a rule. That's still great. But now you can consolidate a lot of those into a few smart rules. So you'll have a much shorter list of rules, a much easier workflow to keep up with that's dynamic and adapts to your changing company, is much more scalable. We do have a few additional resources for any of you that want to look at more. You should definitely reach out to your account manager or customer success manager. They'll be happy and prepared to answer any questions you have about smart rules. If you have technical questions as you're setting them up, you can also reach out to support@frontapp.com, and they'll help you with any of those tactical moments in front. And then there's also a great Help Center resource. Here's a link below. If you look up smart rules on the Front Help Center, you'll be able to find it.
I will just add that you will find all the step-by-step guides for all the things we described today in the Help Center if you need it.
That's right. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we can't wait to see the smart rules that you create.